Hello there, this is Aaron Sachs, and in this video, I seek to demonstrate the power of natural selection as evidenced through three case studies of convergent evolution based on modern research. So I'm going to try my best to make this video both entertaining and informative, so cue the music. Okay, so convergent evolution, okay, that's enough, stop the music! Okay, so no music, but this definitely won't be as drab as reading research articles. I've already done that for you. Now, the first article we'll talk about will look at how selective pressures on Hawaiian Islands have resulted in the expression of the flat wing trait in several different cricket species. And that one is called Rapid Convergent Evolution in Wild Crickets, and that is by these authors. The next article we'll look at, we'll see how selective pressure from predators on the Japanese Izu Islands have caused the convergent evolution of phenotypes and biological life cycles of their lizard prey species. And finally, so that's that article right there. And then finally, we're going to turn to an example that I find particularly interesting, namely the convergence of an unusual method of reproduction called social hybridogenesis in several ant species of the genus Messer, interspersed throughout Europe, Africa, and the Mediterranean. And that's that article right there. Those authors. Okay, so let's get started. Wait a second. I feel like we're missing one key ingredient here. What the heck is convergent evolution? Well, let's check it out. So, convergent evolution is said to have occurred when similar traits, usually in terms of morphology or behavior, evolve independently in two or more unrelated lineages of organisms. Traits that have evolved convergently are known as homoplaces. But this still might not be totally clear. Let's look at an example first. Okay, yeah, right. So we have a shark and a dolphin. Okay. So now about 443 million years ago, during the Silurian period, cartilaginous fish such as sharks, you got your shark over here, evolved streamlined bodies equipped with dorsal fins, pectoral fins, and flippers in order to travel through water efficiently and quickly. So let's just circle these. So you got your pectoral fins there. You can touch that one. You got your your flipper back there, and then you got your dorsal fin up there. Okay, so that's a shark. That's a fish, right? And then let's get rid of that one. Don't need that. Okay, and then about 400 million years later, land-dwelling mammals who had expanded their niche to the sea converged on the same exact streamlined, or not same exact, but very similar. Streamlined body with analogous fin features, right? So if you look at the dolphin here, which once again derived from mammals, you have your same fin, right? Same dorsal fin. You got pectoral fins right there, corresponding, and then you have your flipper back here, right? Pretty interesting. So they converge to very similar body types. Now, think about how utterly improbable such convergence in body type would be in a mammal and a fish. Like, does it really make sense that a sea-dwelling mammal would spontaneously and randomly develop like the same exact traits? Well, not exact, but very similar traits as a fish, the shark here. So basically, in light of that utter improbability, there has to be selective pressure guiding the expression of these traits in both organisms, which is why convergent evolution is something important to study. Okay, we're almost done with this intro stuff, but before jumping into examples from modern research in convergent evolution, I just want to alert you to some subtle differences in assumptions that different researchers place on the definition of convergent evolution. So as you can see here, some researchers take a process-based definition of convergent evolution, which assumes that convergent evolution necessarily has a process that produces similarities in traits in independent lineages. Now, the other definition, right, so other researchers take a pattern-based definition of convergent evolution, which simply states that independently evolved similarity is all you really need to call a trait convergent. This definition does not require an underlying process to be identified. Now, the pattern-based definition of convergent evolution is preferable to the process-based definition for several reasons, one of which is because homoplaces are often the result of a confluence of factors, and that truth is sort of obscured with the process-based definition. So let's go ahead and put a big green circle around pattern-based. We like that one. Let's go ahead and put a X around process-based. Generally preferred is pattern-based one. Furthermore, it's sometimes difficult or impossible to determine the exact selective pressures that lead to convergence in traits. And we will see this in our analysis, which starts right now. So let's turn to our first example experiment. This experiment, come on guys, I'm not that boring.
Yes, you are.
Well, you know what, crickets? Let's just get to it. Anyways, this experiment studies the development of the flat wing trait, so flat wing trait, in two populations of field crickets, one on the Hawaiian island of Kauai and another on the neighboring island of Oahu. Okay. Now, the researchers sought to determine if the flat wing trait originated on Kauai, so let's use a different color, originated here on Kauai, and then migrated to Oahu, or if the trait developed independently on each island. The most important implication of the flat wing trait in crickets is that it prevents them from emitting chirping sounds.
What?
That's right. Take that, crickets. Next time, think twice before you make fun of me. Anyways, Hawaii is an excellent place to study convergent evolution. There is a wide variety of habitats on the island. High peaks, let's draw some out. High peaks, deep valleys even. Well, I guess that's a high peak by, so there you go, deep valley right there. Deep valleys, differing amounts of rainfall in the area. You got a lot of rainfall here maybe, and there's not so much there. So basically, it's a living laboratory for observing how similarities and differences in habitats are associated with phenotypes of organisms living in the archipelago. Furthermore, since the sequence of formation dates for each of the Hawaiian islands is known, the islands provide a sort of timeline to estimate when morphological or behavioral changes took place on each island, which is pretty cool. Okay, so how did the researchers determine that the flat-wing trait was independently developed on both islands? Well, the first piece of evidence that the researchers pointed to intuitively enough was the morphological differences between the flat-wing phenotypes in the populations of the two islands. So let's take a look. So here is the normal cricket wing appearance right here, morphology. And here is the flat wing mutated wing on the Kauai island. And here is the flat wing mutated wing on the on the populations of the Oahu island. Now, just looking at the morphologies, we can see that the morphologies of the wings are quite different, which suggests that they didn't come from the same ancestors. So if you look at these three landmark locations right here in the Oahu flatwing, they're pretty close together, right? But if you look at the same three location landmarks on the Kauai flatwing, they're kind of far apart. And actually using PCA, which stands for Principal Component Analysis, as a statistical method, the researchers were able to assert that flatwings of the two populations were about 4 times more different from one another than the normal wings of the two populations. And you can see that from the diagrams. Now, we probably should have more evidence of convergence to really assert that that the flatwing trait in these two islands really did develop independently. And so what the researchers did was they looked at the same alleles of the crickets of both populations, and they found that different loci were associated with the flatwing mutation. So let's actually move to a different diagram. Yeah, so a locus in an allele. So this is an allele right here. A locus, plural is loci, is a position on that allele. So this could be a locus. This could be a locus. And so there are two hypotheses for the location of for the location of the mutation that causes flatwing in the two populations of crickets. The first hypothesis right here says that the mutations occurred at identical locations, at identical loci in the corresponding alleles for the Kauai and the Oahu populations. That's what this diagram is saying right here. It's saying that this mutation, which causes flatwing in the Kauai population, occurs at this locus, and in the corresponding allele in the Oahu population, let's use the right color, on the corresponding allele, the mutation that causes flatwing also occurs at the same locus. Okay, and that suggests descent from a common ancestor. So that would go against the idea that flatwing developed independently and convergently in the two populations. Fortunately, the data that the researchers found does not support this first hypothesis. Instead, it supports the second hypothesis. Let's check that one out. So hypothesis 2. This one suggests that the allele mutations that cause flatwing occur in different loci for the two cricket populations. And that's what we see over here. So in the Kauai population, once again, in this allele, we see that the flatwing mutation occurs at this locus. And looking at the corresponding allele for the Oahu Island, we see, oh, wait a second, the mutation for the flatwing trait occurs at a different locus in the same allele. And this points to the independent and convergent evolution of the flatwing trait in the two islands. Okay, great. So now we know that the flatwing trait in the two cricket populations on Oahu and Kauai evolved independently rather than, say, from a group of flatwing crickets from Kauai migrating to Oahu. And this is important. This is very important for our study of the power of natural selection as evidenced through convergent evolution. But how does a convergent evolution of the flatwing trait on these two islands really show the power, of natural selection? Well, let's check it out. So even though the flatwing mutation evolved to produce different morphologies via different mutations on different loci, it still rapidly spread through both populations on Oahu and Kauai. Now, this has to be due to natural selection driven by some force, and actually the researchers hypothesized that this selective pressure is by a parasitic fly named, let's check it out, Ormia, spell it out, Acraceae. So Ormia acraceae is a parasitic fly that locates its host, often a cricket, by listening for its chirps, and its parasitism is often fatal. Now, through the power of natural selection against chirping, as a result of the identical pressure of the parasite on the two islands, two distinctly located populations were driven via different mutations to converge to the same inability to chirp. That's pretty cool. Now let's just look at an example. So in generation 1, this is hypothetical, but in generation 1 of this cricket population on Oahu, the red individuals here are the flatwing individuals, and the blue individuals are the normal wing individuals. Now let's say for hypothetical thinking here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 normal individuals on generation 1, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4 flatwing individuals in generation 1 on the Oahu Island. And then there's a parasitic fly attack.
No!
Sorry guys, that's what happens when you can't adapt to selective pressure. And then, let's check out first before we have another parasitic fly attack. Anyways, we see that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Wow, so now there's 6 flatwing individuals on the second generation on the Oahu Island. And now there's only 1, 2, 3 normal individuals. Wow, that's interesting. Now let's have another fly attack.
Wow, good thing I have flat wings.
Right. So we see that over the course of 3 imaginary generations, the flatwing trait will be selected for, and increasing numbers of individuals in future generations will have this trait. And eventually, the individuals who cannot adapt to selective pressure will die out. And this is why crickets converged in the flatwing trait on Oahu and Kauai.
Now watch me whip, kill it. Now watch me nay. Okay. Now watch.
Okay. Now let's leave the tropical paradise of Hawaii and venture to an even more beautiful place, Japan. Japan. That's more like it. Okay, now we're going to be talking about Izu skin-sid lizards. Izu being the island in Japan that these lizards live on. So let me write that out for you. Izu skin-sid, and then I'll write that here. Lizards. Great. Okay. This next experiment is going to reveal how the convergent evolution of certain phenotypes and biological life cycles of Izu skin-sid lizards in the Japanese Izu Islands has occurred in response to different predator pressure across the 11 different islands, which are right here. So let's see, looking at the map, we first noticed that the islands with bird-only predation tend to be located in the south, and that islands with bird and snake predation tend to be located in the north. So we can tell that this is the case by looking at these little icons here, so you can see birds. That means birds are the only predators on these islands for the skin-sid lizards. And then if we look at the, I'll use a different color. So here we see bird and snake predators, bird and snake weasel on the Oshima, which is actually unique. Bird, snake, bird, snake, bird, snake. Okay, and so basically what we're saying is that in the northern region, we tend to see bird and snake predators, whereas in the southern region, we tend to see just bird predators on the islands. And then we have this one island, Miyake, in the middle, which actually has, which is in the middle and only has bird predators. Great. So let's see. Fascinatingly, the skin-set lizards that inhabit the 4 islands with bird-only predators tend to mature later. So actually, I'm going to fill out this table here. Let me just get rid of this little thing here. There we go. Yeah, so they tend to mature later if you're in the south. So I was right, relatively later in life, and that's referring to sexual maturity. They tend to be drab-brown in color. So I'm just going to write drab right here, drab in color. They tend to lay relatively few eggs. So I'm going to say relatively few right here. And the egg size is quite large. And then we saw, it's relatively large for eggs. And then we see that the location tends to be in the south. So, and that's for bird predator traits only for those lizards. And now we look at the bird and snake islands. So the islands with bird and snake predators. So let's see how the lizards compare to the bird-only islands. Well, we see that the lizards on the 7 islands with both bird and snake predators are vividly colored. So I'm going to write vivid right here, vividly colored. They have bright blue they have bright blue tails, and they have bright stripes on their back. They tend to mature earlier. So I was right, relatively earlier. Once again, that's referring to sexual maturity, so they tend to mature earlier. And they lay many eggs, so number of eggs are relatively many. And then their egg size is relatively small, and we know that, they locate, these islands tend to be located in the north. Great, okay, so got that memorized? Well, if so, you can go join Mensa, but for the rest of us, I'm going to leave the table in the top right-hand corner, there we go, for reference just for a minute. Okay, so we know that lizards on bird-only islands have developed certain set of traits, so these ones right here, and we know that lizards on bird and snake-inhabited islands have developed a different set of traits. So I'm going to erase this just so we have a little bit more room to work with here. Get rid of that. Great. Okay. Now we want to know if these sets of traits were independently derived in each island of a particular predator type, which would show convergent evolution, or if these characteristics were derived once and spread to each island via migration. So in other words, we want to know if the population of lizards on this bird predator island here, Hachijo, originated there independently and in response to the bird predators on that island, rather than the lizards on this island inheriting the same phenotype of a population of lizards that migrated from a different bird predator island, such as Aogoshima over here. So like that. So to test for convergent evolution, the researchers used PCR, polymerase chain reaction, to collect copies of the DNA sequences of 2 empty DNA genes. So those are, wrong color. Those are ND1, that's one gene, and cytochrome B is the other gene. And they collected these genes for each of the 155 individuals sampled across all the islands. They also collected the DNA sequences of the R35 nuclear locus gene, R35, in order to build a phylogenetic tree, which is right here. Okay, let's put that right there. Awesome. So this phylogenetic tree offered strong support that the 2 phenotypes in the lizards were independently developed at least twice among the populations across the 11 islands. Let's take some time to understand this tree, since it offers a variety of facts not only pointing to the convergent evolution of traits in the skin-set lizards, but also illustrates how the researchers use statistics to embrace uncertainty in the experiment, which is kind of cool. So let's look at the pie chart. So the pie charts at each node, so this one right here, for instance, they represent the probabilities that the ancestor at that node inhabited specific Idzu islands. So at this node, for instance, which is shown, actually, I'm going to put that right up there, just so you can see it zoomed in. We see that the ancestor most likely belonged to the island corresponding to the color, what looks like purple. So, okay, so that's the island Toshima. So we think that the ancestor likely belonged to Toshima. And okay, so that's the pie charts. Now we also see these gray bars here, kind of interesting. But what are these? these are the 95% credible intervals for the age of common ancestors. So if I draw a line down here, say, and draw a line down here, basically what this is saying is that we are 95% confident that the ancestor, this ancestor here, this one, is between about 200,000 years old and about 80,000 years old. So before analyzing the tree more, I just want to define a key term for you: monophyletic group. So I'm going to write that up here. Monophyletic group. Cool. So a monophyletic group is a group of descendants with the same common ancestor. So for instance, this guy up here, this is a common ancestor, and all of his descendants are here. So together, these guys form a monophyletic group. And another example down here, let's choose this blue guy down here. You can kind of see him. And so he's the ancestor, and here are his descendants. So that's a monophyletic group. Great. Now back to the analysis. We see that some descendants from the most recent common ancestor of the northern monophyletic group, such as this lizard, this guy right here. Some of those descendants develop the typical bird-predator phenotype and life history traits on the bird-only island of Miyake. That's what the M stands for in the MYO2 there. We also see that descendants from the most recent common ancestor of the southern clade developed the bird-predator traits. So this guy right here, for instance, developed the bird-predator traits, even though these southern clade descendants, so once again, this is the southern clade, and he's the most common ancestor of the southern clade, and he's the most common ancestor of the northern clade. Even though these southern descendants do not come from the same monophyletic group as the northern descendants, they still develop the same bird phenotype in some of the descendants. And since these bird-predator phenotype lizards, boom and boom, are in different monophyletic groups, and the northern clade monophyletic group mainly has descendants of the bird and snake predator phenotype, we can confidently say that these bird-predator phenotypes have evolved independently, therefore showing that convergent evolution is acting. Wow, so now that we know that convergent evolution is occurring, let's talk selection.
Ah yes, I do love a good talk on natural selection. I am most eager to see how you explain its relevance to this delightful experiment.
Yes, Charles Darwin, we all know you love talking about natural selection. And man, that was a pretty terrible British accent, Charles Darwin. Anyways, we see once again that convergent evolution reveals the power of natural selection to gradually optimize an organism's traits in the face of similar selective pressures. The environments on each of the islands are very similar in terms of climate and flora in the Izu Islands, and differ mainly in their diversity of vertebrate predators, which means that this predator diversity could be the main cause of the convergent phenotypic and life history evolution among the lizard populations on islands with similar predators. Now, the researchers explained that the larger size of hatchlings in the bird-only southern islands is due to the small size of the main bird predator, the Izu Islands thrush, since it is difficult for small birds to consume large prey. Furthermore, since birds have strong visual acuity, they would almost always catch vividly colored lizards, but might occasionally fail to notice drab-colored lizards that can blend in with the brown-colored leaf litters on these islands. The researchers also assert that in lab tests, snakes attacked blue-tailed lizards less frequently than lizards with darkly colored tails. Furthermore, they believe that the striped body of the lizards would disrupt the snake's perception of the lizard's body, which could aid lizard survival. As a result, the blue-tailed, vivid striped pattern of lizards in the northern islands would be effective in preventing snake attacks on vital parts of the body, such as the head or trunk. Awesome. So now we've looked at how different populations of crickets on Hawaii have independently converged on the flatwing phenotype. We've seen natural selection has independently shaped the traits of lizards in response to different predators. Now let's turn to our last and, in my opinion, most interesting example.
Kane is in the building.
It's Mr. Steal Your Girl.
Awesome. So this next experiment reveals how selective pressures resulted in the convergent evolution of social hybridogenesis in 3 species of the messer harvester ant genus. These species are Messer barbarus, which you can see here, Messer structor, which you can see here, and Messer ebeninus, which you can see here. So, okay, hold on. I just said a whole bunch of things. What is social hybridogenesis exactly? Well, I think Ferris Bueller could explain it better than anyone. That's right, folks. We're about to talk about reproduction.
Oh, reproduction is a most perplexing and fascinating subject indeed. I never could explain the means by which a parent's traits could be passed to his or her offspring.
We know Charles Darwin, we know, and keep up with that accent. It's really quite good. It's getting there. Anyways, social hybridogenesis is an unorthodox reproductive system in which 3, rather than 2, reproductive partners are needed to produce and maintain a fertile colony. Okay, so in social hybridogenesis, within a colony, there exist queens and males of one lineage, queens and males of another distinct lineage, and workers who are hybrids of the 2 lineages. So let's have red represent let's call it the red lineage. So equals, I don't know, red lineage. And then green will represent the green lineage. I'm just gonna, so green corresponds to green lineage. We'll just call it arbitrary names here. Okay, great. So now let's imagine we have a queen from the red lineage. I'm gonna draw, so queen from the red lineage. Great. Now, when queens mate with males of their own lineage, so say we do queen and male of the corresponding red lineage, they're going to produce queens of that same lineage. Great. So they produce a red queen. Awesome. And they produce, and so when they mate with males of the other lineage, so in this case, the green lineage, they're going to produce hybrid workers. So let's just draw. I'll just draw it in green, I guess. But so it'll be workers. But he's a hybrid though. So instead of being green or red, he's a mix. Cool. Now, males laid via parthenogenesis, or asexual reproduction by queens, so let's use the red queen again, will be of the same lineage as the queen. So I know it's a little complicated, but he's going to be the same lineage as the queen, and that's via asexual reproduction, parthenogenesis. Whereas males laid by workers via parthenogenesis, once again, that's asexual reproduction, will have a recombination of the genes from the 2 lineages. So let's see, so worker of the, I don't know, it's a worker hybrid over here, let's say. And when parthenogenesis occurs with this worker, the offspring will be a male. And he's going to have a recombination of the genes from the 2 lineages. So he's not just a hybrid, it's recombinant. So let's do something like this, I guess. Just to represent it well. Yeah. And he is a male. Cool. Great. And so this diagram here is going to be analogous for the case of a green queen as well. Okay, cool. So as a result, if queens only mated with males of their own lineage, no workers, right? So if this only happened, we wouldn't get any workers. And if queens only mated with males from the other lineage, so if they only produce workers, then no queens would be produced. And both scenarios in this case would lead to the infertility and eventual death of the colony. So in order to determine whether or not social hybridogenesis behavior evolved independently in the 3 species, the researchers created a molecular phylogeny, similar to what they did in the previous experiment with the lizards, a molecular phylogeny of the entire Messer genus to identify where pairs of dependent lineages, like this, and this, and this, where those pairs of dependent lineages would fall on the tree. And as you can see here, they found that the 3 pairs of dependent lineages, one for each of the 3 social hybridogenesis species, so Barbarus, Ebeninus, Destructor, they found that each of these pairs occupied separate monophyletic groups. Once again, that means that they had different ancestors. So these guys came from this ancestor. These guys, what we see here, so they came from this ancestor, and then these guys came from this ancestor. And that suggests that the social hybridogenesis trait evolved independently in each of these 3 Messer ant species. Also, in case you're wondering, the hundreds on each of these branches, well, that represents the number of times the data was resampled in a statistical technique called the bootstrap method. Now, obviously, that's not really what we're talking about here, but you should really look it up if you like stats because it's a fascinating and very widely used technique. So anyways, now that we know that convergent evolution of social hybridogenesis behavior is occurring in the Messer ant genus, let's talk about how selective pressures could have led to this convergence. So one possible explanation for the evolution of social hybridogenesis in these different ant species is because of the species' similar occupation of Mediterranean climates, where summer rainfalls only occur over a few days. So if we look at this diagram here, this is the Mediterranean. Say that this timeline represents the summer season. So this is the beginning of the summer, this is the end of the summer. This is where rain is occurring, and this is where no rain is occurring. It's dry time. Okay, so since mating flights in these ants, massive mating flights, typically occur after summer rainfalls when nests are easiest to excavate, it would be favorable for colonies living in the Mediterranean to have massive and short-term mating flights rather than smaller mating flights spread out over longer periods of time. So what do I mean by that? Well, for instance, if ants decided to mate a little bit, say in this part of the summer and a little bit here and a little bit there, the soil wouldn't be wet, digging burrows would be hard, and they would be at much greater risk for being eaten by predators. But if they all decided, so in this alternative world, if they all decided to mate in one big massive mating session at, say, this point in the summer, the chances that their offspring would survive would be much higher since the soil would be moist. Okay, now because of this tendency to have large mating flights in the Mediterranean rather than small ones, social hybridogenesis could have arisen since chances for mating with ants of a different lineage and producing hybrids increase compared to small mating flights. Now some studies suggest that the hybridization of workers that results through social hybridogenesis could improve the fitness of the colony as a whole, since hybrid workers might have enhanced resistance to parasites or diseases and could exploit a wider range of resources. But the researchers mention another possible explanation for the evolution of social hybridogenesis in Messer barbarus, Messer structor, and Messer ebeninus. And that suggestion is that this evolution of social hybridogenesis stems from their diet, which consists only of seeds. Okay? Now, in many ant species, diet and larval nutrition are actually determinants of an ant's caste or social role. As larvae who consume more insects tend to develop into queens. So consume more insects, you become a queen. That's great. Now, since harvester ants eat only seeds, though, they may have needed to evolve genetic factors for caste determination, and they could do that through social hybridogenesis. Caste determination is beneficial to the individuals living in the ant society since it allows for more efficient societies to form in terms of reproduction and obtaining resources. Okay, wow. So to recap this example, this instance of convergent evolution, to go back to the point of this entire video, illustrates the power of natural selection because the niches that the ant species occupy place selective pressure on their abilities to breed at optimal times and form efficient societies with castes.
We're bringing it back.
Wow, so that was a lot in this video. So even if you didn't fully understand everything in this video, here are the most important takeaways that I want you to learn. So like what we talked about in the beginning, we have two definitions subtly different of convergent evolution. We have the pattern-based definition, and we have the process-based definition. And we see from our examples that the pattern-based definition of convergent evolution really should be preferred. There isn't always one process that causes convergent evolution. Now, although in the case of the crickets and the lizards, the selective pressures resulting in the conversion seemed clear and intuitive, we saw in the last example that two possible explanations might exist for the convergence in social hybridogenesis. And indeed, there might even be other ones that we have to consider. Those two that we looked at could be completely wrong. I mean, those are theories that need to be supported with more evidence. Okay, cool. We also saw in a bunch of these experiments that we can reconstruct phylogenies with DNA sequences. That's amazing. I mean, you can look at differences in the bases in alleles. You can look at the different loci of many different organisms, and then reconstruct, the ancestry of a species and see which species they came from, which ones they turned into, their descendants. It's fascinating, and that's something that you'll see in many research articles in the future. Okay. We also see that selective pressure can take a variety of forms. In the first example, it was parasites, parasitic flies causing fatalities in cricket populations. In the second example, it was predators, birds and snakes in lizard, eating lizards in Japan. In the third case, we saw there, it could be different selective pressures. It could be to form castes in society to make more efficient societies that will benefit all the ants, or it could be, looking for better times to reproduce in order to have the most offspring succeed in the next generation. Okay, we also see, going back to the entire purpose of this video, we see the power of natural selection as evidenced through convergent evolution. Basically, convergent evolution is particularly useful for showing the power of natural selection since it represents independent replications of similar adaptations resulting from similar selective pressures. So since they're replications and they occur independently, that's really strong support for natural selection. It definitely shows the power that it has to shape organisms. Wow. So anyways, thank you so much for watching. You've been a great audience. Thank you for putting up with my stupid jokes, and see you next time.